Hi, here is a January mid-month wrap-up. Thank you to April Sarah for doing a video like this and for Elizabeth recommending it to me because I think it might be easier for me to wrap up mid-month than to try to incorporate 30 or 40 titles in one video, which is kind of a goal for January. But at the very least, I just wanted to mention something before I even get started. I have not done any individual reviews for almost 2 months. And in that 2 months, I've read over 60 books. And I obviously am not going to do 60 individual review videos. So I may try and set those up as genre, group them by genre. Either that or I'll just let those go and start from this point on. And I'm not quite sure how I'm going to handle that yet. But for January so far, not including the book that I read today, I have read 20 books, which is 6,981 pages. And I am referring to my notes because with 20 books plus the one that I just finished, there's no way I'm going to remember all of this. 6,981 pages with an average of 349 pages a day. And that's what I've done so far. Now, the first book that I read in January, on January 1st actually, is A Holiday by Gaslight by Mimi Matthews. This is a historical romance, and it was from Perfectly Proper Press. It came out on November 13th, and I gave it 4 stars. It's simply a novella. I think it was 175 pages. Then I read Cowboy Boat by Carolyn Brown. Now, I read Cowboy Boat because I did get an arc of the next book in this Longhorn Canyon series. And because I enjoy reading series, I went to the library and I grabbed the first book and I read it, and that's this one. This came out May 29th. It's by Forever Books, and I gave it 4 stars. This is basically about a ranch where every year they have a camp for underprivileged kids. And Retta Palmer was hired to work with the girls for the summer. And then Cade McGuire, he works at the ranch year-round, and he was pretty much going to focus on the boys. It was a great little, sweet little romance. I really enjoyed it. The kids were great. The storyline was great. And it had a really nice conclusion. Now, a side note, I'm reading the 3rd book in the series, which is Cowboy Brave. But before I tell you about the next books in the series, I do want to go on to the very next read, which was Cowboy Honor by Carolyn Brown. I'll try to get that fully in there. Now, this was Longhorn Canyon number 2, as I've already mentioned. It's by Forever Books. It came out September 25th, and I gave it 4 stars. Now, in this book, there was a blizzard, and Claire Mason's car broke down. She was with her 4-year-old niece, and they holed up in a cabin, and then in comes bursting Levi Jackson, who is a foreman on a ranch that was near the cabin, and he helps them and helps to work on getting her car fixed and so forth, and quite naturally they fall in love. And not only is it a sweet story, but it has a very practical conflict and a really good resolution. Because in romances, you know, you have the same formula. You have boy meets girl, they fall in love, they have a problem, they work it out, and they end up happily ever after. But I like the way that this one worked out. The next book I read was Watching You by Lisa Jewell, and this was an arc that I got, and it's a psychological thriller by Atria Books. It came out December 26th, and I gave it 4.5 stars. Now, I use an expression is who is watching who in this book. And also in my written review, I said it could easily be called The Suspect because everybody was suspect. Everybody had a motive. And it kind of focused on one man, which his name was Tom Fitzwilliam. He was a headmaster at a school. He garnered a lot of attention. He had his son Freddie, and then there was a neighbor who was a lady named Joey. She was newly married. And one of these is a voyeur, and this leads to murder. As I mentioned, everybody is a suspect. Everybody's connected. The story's told in past and present point of view. Everybody's telling secrets, and no one is above guilt. And last but not least, I was truly shocked at who the killer was. That is that. Then I read A Scandalous Deal by Joanna Shupe. Now, this is book number 1 in the 400 series. No, there's not 400 books. It's just the time period in the Gilded Age where you had a very distinct group of people who were distinguished because of money and so forth. Now, in this particular book, there's Philip Mansfield. He's richer than rich, and he's building this one of its kind, or first of its kind hotel. And he's waiting for this architect to come and to put the plans in action and get things working. But instead, he meets Lady Eva Hyde. Now, they met on the ship on the way to New York, but she is the one who shows up instead of the esteemed architect. Now, she had skills, exceptional skills as an architect. But as mentioned, this was during the Gilded Age, and women just with those skills were just not accepted. So I really enjoyed that. Then I read by Joanna Shupe, A Daring Engagement, and this was the number 2 in the series. And this is about Nora Parker, who was in love with a man who was quote-unquote beneath her station because her father was an earl. The man that she was in love with was an artist, and her father did not want her to marry him, so he ships her off to New York in order to meet a prospective husband, somebody who was more on her level, so to speak. Well, when she gets there, she convinces this supposed rake to pose as her fiance, and in so doing, she hopes to convince him, her father, that at least the other guy is a better quality than the guy that she's pretending to be engaged with. It doesn't work out for her, though, because he's actually a good man. He's extremely intelligent. He's a financial wizard. And the story, it has some humor in it. It definitely has mystery in it, and I really enjoyed it. A side note, the reason I read this book is because there's a new series coming out with a character whose name is Frank Tripp. He was in these stories, and last year I read The Notorious Vow by Joanna Shupe. I did that for a blog tour, which is book number 3. The series is over, but there's a new one, so I wanted to refamiliarize myself with those characters. Then I read Laird of the Black Isle by Paula Quinn. This is by Forever. It's a Kindle title. I believe I got this from my library. Now, this is Lachlan and Mally's story. It's my favorite. I read the whole series, all 4 of them, but I really like this one the most because he was a widower with a broken heart. His daughter was also killed. At least that's what he thought, for a period of 2 years. But as it turns out, this woman is kidnapped, or he kidnaps a woman because he's told that if he trades her, he'll get information about his daughter. Well, things don't turn out as either of them expect, and what I really liked about the story is the children that were part of it. Then I read Highlander, the 4th book in the series, which was Highlander Ever After. And in this particular book by Paula Quinn, and as you see, it's a print arc from Forever, which came out on December 18th. I gave this one 4 stars. This is Adam and Cinna's story. And in this particular story, it was another Highland story. And honestly, I didn't write notes. But I will say this. I did read the first 3 books in the series, which was A Highland's Christmas Kiss, The Scots Bride, and as mentioned, Laird of the Black Isle. I enjoyed it, and I gave it 4 stars, but I can't tell you why. Now, then the next book I read was The Boy by Tami Hoag, and I got this as an arc, and it's a mystery thriller by Dutton Books. It came out December 4th, and I gave this one 5 stars. Now, this is a Broussard and 4K series, and it's kind of odd because the first one, A Thin Dark Line, that came out in 1997. So obviously with this huge gap, this story did very well as a standalone. This was really good because it was really sad. It was about the loss of a child. And then after the child dies, the mother survives a horrific attack. The 12-year-old babysitter goes missing, and It's very shocking in theme, but in content and storyline as well, because it contains bullying, abuse, control, secrets, bone-deep depression. It was really good, and what made it exceptional is that I listened to the audiobook, and I want to mention that Hilary Huber, she narrated it, and she had a fantastic grasp of Cajun patois, so I was really, really able to enjoy this story, despite the theme and despite the fact that there were sort of triggers in the story. Then I read Her One Mistake by Heidi Perks. Now, this was another arc I got, and this was a psychological thriller from Gallery Books. I gave this one 4.5 stars. Now, in this book, a woman named Charlotte, a mother of 3 kids, takes her friend's daughter to a school fair, and she gets busy on her phone, and next thing you know, the little girl goes missing. Well, then the story begins to be told in the before and the now, and we begin to learn about Harriet, the daughter, the little girl's mother, in her marriage, and the secrets and the darkness, and how unsettling things are. And again, as I mentioned, I think in another book, things were not as they seem. You can't forget, once you read this book, the horrible husband Brian, and all the secrets that Harriet was hiding from her friends. And all this has a lot to do with why her daughter disappeared. So that was a good read. Then I read The Hymen Renegade by Amy Jarecki. And I do have that arc, and that's this one right here. And again, this is from Forever Publishing. And now this is really good because clan owner Robert Grant's rival's daughter is kidnapped, and his loyalty is tested. He's like, well, why do I have to be the one to come to her rescue? But he does, and it's really great because where Janet Cameron, the woman who was kidnapped, happened to be at the time, she was looking for a mate because her stepmother was trying to marry her off. I really liked this book because not only was it a romance, but it had warm family connections involving his sister Emma and Jana's brother Kenan, who had a pretty rough temper, and it contained the evil English soldiers, which really affected Scottish history at the time. There was a lot of action involved. And just a side note, I read the first 4 books in the series just last month. Number 12, In Dog We Trust by Beth Kendrick. Okay, this was The Black Dog Bay, number 5. It's a women's fiction by Berkeley Books. It came out January 8th, and I gave it 4 stars. I haven't had a chance to read any of the other books in the series, but basically, Jocelyn Hillier becomes a glorified dog walker, and suddenly the dog's owner dies, and when this happens, she becomes their legal guardian and becomes uber rich because she has now a great big trust in order to care for the dogs. Meanwhile, there's an estranged son named Liam, and Liam is determined to get a hold of that money because he feels that he was robbed. It was a great story, and I have to tell you, the dogs were hilarious. The next book I read was An Anonymous Girl by Greer, Hendricks, and Sarah Pekkanen. Now, this was a psychological thriller by St. Martin's Press. I gave this 5 stars. Now, Jessica Ferris was a makeup artist, and she kind of maneuvered her way into a survey which should have been 3 questions for quick money, and she would have been going on with her life. However, things got far, far worse. And the psychologist in the story, she got into Jessica's life and psyche, and it ended up being a story of obsession, fidelity, and murder, or infidelity and murder. Now, the next book was She Lies in Wait by Gytha Lodge, a mystery thriller by Random House, and I gave this one 4 stars. It came out January 8th. Now, this is DCI Jonah Sheen's number 1, a new series. It starts off in 1983 where 7 teenagers, ages, I believe 13 to 18, go camping. 7 go, 6 come back because one girl, Aurora, was killed. When she was killed, they never were able to solve the crime, and 30 years later, her bones were found, and the investigation is reopened, and now Jonah is handling this cold case. He begins to interview each of these now adults who have made various progress in their lives, and now secrets begin to unravel. There might have been a cover-up, and it was pretty intriguing. Then I read The Perfect Liar by Thomas Christopher Greene. I will tell you, this came out, psychological thriller, came out by St. Martin's Press, and it was released on the 15th, and I was only able to give this one 2.5 stars. Now, I was completely underwhelmed with this book, and as I've told a couple of friends of mine, all I can say is beware of the white bear. That's all I'm going to tell you about that one. Then I read a literary fiction which was called The Farm by Joanne Ramos. Now this one does not come out until May 7th, but I'll briefly tell you about it. I was able to give this one 5 stars, and bottom line, it was about renting your room for profit. It was a bit futuristic, a bit horror. It had racial inequality. It was a very, very, very intense read, but it was really, really good, and I gave it 5 stars. Then I read Judgment by Joseph Finder, and this was a mystery thriller by Penguin Group Dutton. It will be out January 29th, and I gave it 4.5 stars. Now, this was about a judge named Juliana Brody, and she made a horrific mistake. She decided while she was at a conference to have a one-night stand. They both agreed that they would just do this one night, and they would forget about it and go on with their lives. Lo and behold, he shows up in her courtroom when she has a pivotal case. In this case, she is told to rule in one way, and if she does not rule in a certain direction, then she will be blackmailed, and her life, her judgeship, that of her family, everything can be destroyed. This was very well researched. You could tell that the person did extensive research, Joseph Finder. It was very well written and very difficult to put down. Then I read While the Duke Was Sleeping by Sophie Jordan. Now this came out in 2016, but I requested a newer book by her that won't be out, I believe, until May. And should I get the book, I wanted to read the series up to date. This is the Rogue Files #1. I'll just summarize it by asking you this question. Do you remember the movie While You Were Sleeping with Sandra Bullock? Yes. The Duke was sleeping, and she falls in love with his half-brother. Then I read The Woman Inside by E.G. Scott. Now, E.G. Scott is a pair of writers who, this is their debut novel, and this is a mystery thriller. I gave this one 5 stars. It came out, or will be out, on the 22nd. It's a story of secrets, lies, and murder. Now, Rebecca met Paul in the process of an affair. They got married. They were married 20 years, but the question is, did she ever really know him? Meanwhile, Rebecca, who was a drug rep, she became addicted to the very opiates that she sold, and in so doing, she became very, very paranoid and began to distrust her husband. It had a shocking conclusion that will be with me for a very, very long time. The last book that I read that I will include in this wrap-up is New Year's Eve Murder by Leslie Meier. I got this from my library, as I've gotten every other book in this series from my library. This is the Lucy Stone #12. I have read the first 11. There's 26 in all, and I'm just going to keep reading them once or twice a month until I get the whole series read. I'm definitely enjoying myself. To me, this was one of the better stories. I've gone, I believe, as low as a 4, and in this one, I gave it 4.5 stars. Basically, Lucy and her daughter Elizabeth won a winter makeover contest, so they go to New York for all of this makeover stuff, and they could possibly win $10,000. And in the process, one of the people at the makeup company was murdered, or she died under suspicious circumstances, and then Elizabeth developed similar symptoms and was hospitalized. So Lucy, who's an amateur sleuth, had to figure out what was going on so that nobody else would die, especially her daughter. I really liked the conclusion. I was really tickled by it. I laughed out loud, and so that's why it's getting 4.5 stars. Okay, that is my wrap-up. 20 books, a very long video. I believe the video is 20 minutes, so I managed to wrap up 20 books in 20 minutes. And I will be back with more videos. I have to figure out what kind of format I'm going to use. But that's it for now. Thank you very much. Bye.